Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 48 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Carmel Breathnach for this episode, and Carmel is originally from Ireland, and she now lives in Portland, Oregon. And she lost her mom when she was 11, and she writes primarily about early mother loss. And she is working on her memoir, which is called Briefly, I Knew My Mother. Carmel and I talked about all kinds of things, and I do think that it is so valuable for widowed parents to hear the stories of people who are adults now who can reflect back on what their journeys have been like after losing a mom or a dad at a young age. So we talked about, Carmel read a letter that she actually wrote to her 11-year-old self, 11 being the age she was when her mom died, which she wrote on the occasion of Children's Grief Awareness Month recently. We talked about ways that her dad supported her and her brother after her mom's death. We talked about some of the challenges with school and teachers and some of those struggles after her mom died, and also what she has learned by having to face grief as a young person. We talked about how she ended up coming to the U.S., and we talked about how her early experiences with grief actually influenced her as a teacher, becoming a teacher later, a kindergarten teacher in both Ireland and Portland, Oregon. We talked about her thoughts on Mother's Day and her experience with that as a motherless daughter. She also had some book recommendations. So lots and lots of great discussion, and I hope you enjoy my discussion with Carmel Breathnach. My guest today is Carmel Breathnach, who is joining us from Portland, Oregon. Carmel is originally from Ireland, and she is a former elementary school teacher, both in Ireland and in the U.S., and she is now a writer. She writes primarily on the topic of early mother loss and its lasting effects. Carmel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jenny. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be talking with you today because I think it's really important for those of us who are widowed parents to do everything we can to somehow try to understand our kids' perspective of their loss so that we can support them better, because they may have lost the same person that we lost, but it's a different relationship, it's a different situation and a different perspective. So I think, I know I'm always so grateful to talk to people like yourself who lost a parent at a young age, because it's not like it's going to tell me exactly what my own kids are going through, because obviously everybody's experience is different, but it gives me an awful lot of things to think about and pay attention to, and maybe put some things on my radar screen that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So again, thank you. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. So, why don't we start out, if you don't mind? I'd like to ask you to read a part of this letter that you wrote recently to your 11-year-old self. And you wrote this on the occasion of Children's Grief Awareness Day, which of course was just recently. It's always the third Thursday in November, so we just had that on November 21st this year. And I thought that this letter you wrote to your 11-year-old self would be a great way to start us off. So if you don't mind, would you read from that, please?
Absolutely. Dear 11-year-old me, I'm writing this to you when I'm 42 years old. I know at your age, 42 seems so mature, grown up and far into the future, and in some ways it is. But I'm still the same Carmel with many of the same values, dreams, and aspirations. My dear 11-year-old Carmel, I see you clearly to this day. I feel your unwavering love for your family, your love for those close friends you hold so dear, and I feel your pain. You are being so brave now that Mom has passed on. You watched her suffer a lot for too many years. You witnessed the pain, anxiety, and sorrow of those you love the most. Dear little 11-year-old me, you bear so much fear and sadness for such a little girl. Not only did you worry deeply about the mother you love so much, but you also worry for your kind, devoted, loving father and your older brother, and you hold any anger you feel inside to protect those you deeply care for. You shouldn't have to go through all of this. You allow your anger to show at school sometimes, and you regularly get into trouble for it. Teachers get annoyed with you. They become frustrated when you lose concentration during school time. They don't understand your pain. They never ask you how you are doing. You don't have many opportunities during class to express yourself verbally or creatively, and this is very difficult for you. I still feel this inside. Sometimes division and multiplication just don't seem that important because you have other things on your mind. But you are diligent and always do your work, along with all of the extra work you were given, for talking back to a teacher or laughing with a friend when you aren't supposed to be laughing. It is good to laugh, little one, and you do love having fun. You love playing with your friends, doing activities with Dad and your brother. Life holds many beautiful experiences for you. Savor those moments of delight.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you for asking me to read it.
Yeah, and I'm going to put a link in the show notes to this piece because you do go on after this with some additional thoughts. So I want to make sure that that's there for listeners to take a look at, because I do think, like I said in the beginning, trying to better understand the perspective that our children might have is really important. Before we talk about your journey, I guess what's it like to put such a personal piece out there online for the whole world to see?
It was difficult, actually. I felt pretty vulnerable putting that out there. I guess over the years, having seen some psychic healers and having listened or read some pieces by grief experts, some of them suggested over time that an exercise that might be helpful would be to go back in time and visualize myself as a little girl around the time that my mother died, and just go to her and hold her and tell her that she's loved and cared for and that she'll be okay, and you know, just talk to her. And I've tried that a few times over the years, not very often, but I found it helpful, and I really felt like it was comforting to do that. And so for Children's Grief Awareness Week, our month, I wanted to write a particular blog, and I just thought about, well, why not write a letter to myself when I was 11, when my mother died? And it just poured out of me very easily and very quickly. And then I decided that was the one that I was going to share. But I did have second thoughts about it when I read over it. I thought, this is very vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I wanted it to, I write to connect with others and to help others understand the perspective of children who are grieving. And so I felt like it was a worthwhile endeavor to put it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad you did. Why don't we back up way back earlier in your story, before your mom died, before everything changed? What was your life like, and where were you living? And tell us a little bit about your family.
I'm from Ireland. I was born in Ireland. I moved over to Portland, Oregon in my late 20s. So most of my life I spent, or the majority of my life I spent in Ireland. So my mother got sick when I was 5. So I don't have a whole lot of memories of her before she got sick. I do have some. I actually have a really great memory, and I remember a lot of things that some people can't believe I remember. But so I have a lot of memories from when she got sick. I remember actually the day she came to tell us she was going into hospital, and I was only 5. She told my brother and I at night that she was going into hospital the next day for an operation. And my parents did not know at the time that it was ovarian cancer. They thought it was something not very serious. So she got ovarian cancer. She had ovarian cancer when I was 5, and then they operated on her, and it came back when I was, they operated on her, and the cancer came back when I was 7. So she was sick for quite a while.
And then she did die when you were 11.
Yes.
And so then it was you and your dad, and your brother is older or younger than you?
Yeah, my brother is older than me.
Okay. So what were those early months or years like for you?
Following her death?
Yes.
Well, I guess the fact that my mother was sick for so long, she was quite sick for several years. And so I had witnessed a lot of suffering. My mother was in and out of hospital for weeks and sometimes even months at a time. My dad, very fortunately, was a secondary school teacher. So he taught teenage boys. And his hours were very similar to my brother's and my hours at school. So we were very fortunate in that my dad was home when we were home, left for work when we were leaving for work, had the same vacation time as us, and spent a lot of time with us. So while my mother was in hospital, my dad was there for us all the time. And then when my mother died, we knew that she was going to die because she had been getting more and more ill. And my dad had actually brought us into the sitting room and said to us a few weeks before, Mom's not going to be able to make it. She's not going to last any longer. And at that point, we had witnessed so much suffering that I think we were ready to let her go, even though, of course, we didn't want her to die. We wanted her to live, but we wanted her to be healthy and live and not be suffering the way she was suffering. And so when she died, the difference was she wasn't there, which was a huge difference, and that she was never going to be there again. And that was the hardest thing to kind of wrap our heads around. We were never going to see Ma'am again. But we did know what it was like to be at home without her for several weeks and months at a time. So we just, I think, made the most of it, accepted it, and carried on. And thankfully, we had a very supportive, devoted, wonderful dad who helped us with that.
How about in terms of support outside your dad, in terms of the community or your peers, the school? Did you find that you were understood and supported outside your immediate family, or how was that experience for you as a young girl?
Well, we had very good, kind neighbors, and they rallied around my mother when she was very ill, and they were in and out helping all the time. So I definitely knew that my mother was loved and cared about, and that was something I'll never forget. I'll never forget those women in particular who were by my mother's side and helping my dad. My friends were 10 and 11 years of age, so they really didn't understand. I mean, they understood to some degree, but they couldn't relate. All of my friends still had their mothers. One of my friends lost her dad when she was very young, and we kind of gravitated towards each other around that time and became very close. And I did have a couple of very good friends, one who I laughed a lot with and had fun a lot with, which was very important, and one who in particular wanted to kind of be there for me when I was going through puberty and kind of wanted to be the person that helped me with that. I did get a letter from a lady that was my friend's aunt, and I didn't know her at all, but I got a letter from her, and that letter meant so much to me. It arrived, and I took it down to my room and read it, and this lady just said how much she how many good things she'd heard about my mother and how sad I must be, and how she had lost her mother. And although it was different because she was a grown-up having lost her mother, she still knew what it felt like. And she wrote maybe 2 pages, and it was so beautiful and so meaningful because nobody else did that. And I kept it under my pillow for months, just feeling like there's someone in my town who I don't know and is reaching out to let me know that she gets it, she understands, and she knows that I'm sad. And I still have that letter to this day, so that meant a lot to me.
Wow.
As far as school, no. I did not feel very supported at school or very understood at school. That was very challenging for me.
With kids or teachers or both?
Actually, teachers. I feel like the kids just didn't really know what to do, so they just got on with things and, you know, were their normal selves. Sometimes they were kind and sweet, and sometimes they were just doing their own thing. But teachers, it was very tough. I felt like I got into trouble a lot, even though I was a hard worker and, you know, I always did my homework and everything, but I liked to talk with my friends and laugh. And I suppose I just wanted to do that to kind of get out of my head a little bit. But I got into so much trouble for it. I was just constantly, teachers telling me to stop talking, to stop laughing, to, you know, I was getting extra homework. I was being sent to the principal's office. I was, so I kind of got anxious about, you know, well, I'm going into school, I'm going to get in trouble today if I talk, or, and we didn't have many creative outlets. It was a lot of just kind of reading text and not very much art or physical education, which would have been very helpful to me because I am quite artistic and I love playing games and running around still to this day. So I needed that so much. And we just kind of sat in desks. And especially in Ireland, if it's raining, you don't get outside. So you're just sitting inside behind a desk doing your schoolwork. And I needed some other outlets.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then later you became a teacher yourself, right?
Yeah.
How do you think your experience losing your mom and your experience, you know, in school, in that aftermath, how do you think that affected how you approached your job as a teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. I always loved children, and I've worked with children since I was very young. But I did know in my heart that when I became a teacher, I was going to be a compassionate, kind teacher, and that the number one priority to me wasn't going to be, you know, are they doing their work? Even though, of course, that's important. It was going to be, where is the child coming from today? Like, how is that child doing? And why are they acting a certain way or not acting a certain way? So I always believed that whatever work or whatever was going to come out of the day in school depended on where each child was themselves. And so I actually taught in the same school for a little while after I was qualified as a teacher. And in the very first class that I taught in was a little girl whose mother was diagnosed with cancer while I was there. And I just knew not exactly how she was feeling, because we all feel different, but at the same time, I knew she was afraid. She was, you know, had so many feelings going on. And my main thing was to see where she was coming from each day, how she was doing, give her little jobs as a teacher, help her, not just focus completely on, are you learning your letters right now? You know, just kind of making sure she was okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. That's, and did you say this was the same school that you went to yourself?
Yeah.
Huh. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. It was a wonderful experience, actually.
Yeah. And then when you came to the U.S., you taught, I think it was kindergarten?
I did. I taught kindergarten for 9 years here in Portland.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And so where I taught, it's a very child-centered kindergarten, and so I was able to work with the children at their own pace, and it was very much it was important that we see where each child is coming from. So the environment was very suitable for me because there were children dealing with lots of different things in each classroom that I had. And I was able to give my love and attention to the child for whatever they were dealing with at the time. And that was definitely accepted in the environment that we were in, that was what was important, making sure each child felt safe and loved and comfortable in school and happy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I want to go back to thinking about over the years, how has your family celebrated or recognized or acknowledged things like your mother's birthday or the anniversary of her death? What's worked, or what has worked for you guys?
At home, it was pretty low key for us because we did always speak about my mother openly at home. So on those dates, her birthday and her death anniversary, we, I guess, just continued the conversation, but also maybe shared photographs, looked through photo albums, played her favorite records, talked about maybe her favorite film, that kind of thing. And then on her death anniversary, we always got a mass said for her. I was raised Catholic. I don't practice any religion now, but so we would have a mass in her honor every year, and then in the church bulletin, her name would be printed, and so she would be remembered in the town. So that was important to me, and my dad still has those masses 32 years later.
So your dad still lives in Ireland in the same town?
He does, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So was there any point where you felt like maybe there was kind of a turning point in your journey? Not that everything was, all fixed or whatever, but kind of like where you knew, I'm going to be okay?
For me, I knew that I honestly feel I knew I was going to be okay as soon as it happened because of the kind of father I had in my life and the time he spent with us and the care he had shown us all through and the care he showed my mother. And so when Mom died, I think I just transitioned into this is our new normal now. This is it. And I believe I transitioned into that pretty quickly. Like, now it was not smooth at all in the sense that over the years, different things have come up and different stages in my life have been quite difficult. But I think I knew I was going to be okay because I knew my mother had chosen a great father for us and that he had showed us how caring he could be and was. And so I would say the most thing I worried about was, okay, now is my dad going to be okay? What's going to happen to my dad? And I would say that I had a lot of anxiety around that. So as far as now things are going to be okay, I felt secure in knowing that once Dad's here, things are going to be okay. But if I thought about anything happening to my father, that created a huge amount of anxiety and fear for me.
In terms of like, if potentially something happened to him as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think that, and that's something that I do hear a lot, and it's understandable, right? I mean, kids who have lost one parent know all too well that sometimes things happen, accidents and illnesses. And I think the kids who've had that happen already do, I think, often develop that fear that something could happen. It probably won't, but it could happen to the other parent too.
Exactly. Yeah, my dad still remembers how I used to insist on doing jobs and things to help him For example, if we were going somewhere and he would have a suitcase packed, and the suitcase was one of those old, big, huge suitcases, and I would insist on carrying it for him. And he tells me it was bigger than me, and I would be dragging it out the door, and he would say, Carmel, leave that for me. And I'd say, no, I can do it, because I was trying to eliminate any possible reason for anything happening to my dad.
Oh, like if he injured himself carrying a heavy suitcase or something?
Yeah.
Huh. And you were so small.
Yeah, everything was going through my mind. What if this happens to Dad? What if that happens? And I do remember my friends across the road, they were my age, and they knew that I was very worried about my dad, anything happening to my dad. And I remember one of them saying to me, it's okay, Carmel, we'll adopt you if something happens to your dad. And I said, well, what about my brother? And they said, we'll adopt him too. That meant the world to me. Like, whether they were going to do that or not, it just felt we're not going to be, left, at the side of the road, or we're not going to have to move to a different town or city to live. We're going to just be able to stay here. My friends will take care of us. But, obviously the main thing was I just wanted my dad to be okay. And
yeah,
that
was that the kids across the street or the parents across the street?
The kids.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so speaking of your dad, I love the piece that you wrote. I think it was also part of Children's Grief Awareness Month, and it was called "My Father is My Everyday Hero."
Oh yeah.
Because the National Alliance for Grieving Children, the theme this year was Everyday Heroes.
Yes.
And so there's been a lot of hashtag Everyday Hero posts across social media, and so you wrote a piece for that. About that, and I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes too. And I think that, well, one of the things that you mentioned in the article was that you had written a piece called 3 Things I've Learned Since Losing My Mother, and you'd gotten a really nice message from a man whose wife had died, and he was now raising 2 young kids, and he was interested in your perspective on ways that your dad had supported you and your brother after your mother's death. Because he was reaching out and wanted to be that kind of dad for his own kids. And I thought that was terrific. I love that. And so I wanted to ask you, can you talk about some of the ways that your dad has supported you over the years? Some of the things that he's done, small, large, whatever comes to mind as being particularly useful or meaningful to you.
Yeah. He's done so much. He's been there for us a lot. He devoted so much of his time to my brother and me. He even just his hobbies being gardening and things around the house meant that he was there a lot for us. So if we needed him, he was either inside reading or correcting papers from school, or outside doing his favorite thing, gardening. So he was present a lot. He spoke very openly about my mother, and always encouraged us to speak openly about her and her memory. He left many of her things at home after she died, and actually several of her things are still at home. So my mother's memory is in her home and has been for all these years. That was very consoling and comforting. So not only are there pictures of her around, there's also some of her clothing, some of her, she collected dolls. Well, when my dad would go away, sometimes they'd bring back foreign dolls, little touristy things, and she collected those. They're still there, and different memories like that. And that was very helpful to me, because over the years, I would sometimes go in and look through her things, because if I was missing her a lot, or if I wanted to kind of get to know her a little more, I would just go in and look through her things. And I found when I was maybe 13 years of age, I found one of her rings, a garnet ring, and it fit perfectly on my finger, and I was so excited, and it felt like a little gift from her, even though it had been years since I had spoken to her or seen her. Another thing is I still find some of her clothing that fits me, and I love vintage clothing. So her clothes is vintage now, and I'll go in and find a little blouse or a skirt or something, and we obviously were actually the same size because her things fit me. So that's been wonderful. So it really was beneficial leaving her things there for us in many ways. A big thing is my dad learned how to cook my mother's meals while she was sick. She taught him how to cook several of her dishes. She was a really good cook, and she had some dishes that were very unique to her. And my dad learned how to cook those. And so when she was in hospital and then after she died, my dad would cook us those meals. So there was that continuity of even our meals are still pretty much the same. So that was really great. And then she was also remembered at meals because we'd say, oh, that's Mom's shepherd's pie, or that's your, special fish dish, or whatever like that. My dad always welcomed our friends into our home. They were always very welcome, and we were always given ample time with our friends. That was important to us, and we were given space, privacy. My brother and I had our own bedrooms, and because we all like to read or write or do kind of things on our own, draw, we would all have time to do that. And I think, I would often go into my room and just journal or write out my feelings or write in my diary or draw pictures. And that was all helpful to me, just being given that space and that time and not being asked, what am I doing? Or there was never too many questions. My dad trusted us, and in return, we didn't give him anything to worry about. So I think just him being there and doing his best for us. He brought us on trips too, and he made an effort to bring us out and do things that would kind of take our mind off things like bowling. He brought us bowling, and I didn't even know bowling existed in Ireland at the time. Maybe it started to exist around then, but all of a sudden Dad was bringing us bowling and on little trips on the canal and boats and stuff like that. So it was just, he was doing his best to occupy us, but also allow us our downtime and our privacy too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate, I think, the fact that he was so okay and comfortable with us talking about Mom too, and bringing up things and asking questions, and he would answer to the best of his ability, whenever we did. And I think that was extremely helpful, that we didn't feel like, oh, we're going to upset him by talking about her. It's not like we talked about her all the time or anything, but if we really wanted to, or if we needed to ask something, or if we just mentioned it, it was always made known that, it was good to talk about Mom and remember her.
Mm-hmm. So not having to worry that, well, I really want to ask this question or share this thing I'm thinking about or sad about, but I don't want to upset Dad, so I better not bring it up. It sounds like not having that burden was really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I read, it must have been in one of your blog posts, I'm not sure, but that he was always very accepting of your choices. At some point, I think you said you had pink hair or something, and he was, he kind of rolled with it.
Yeah, exactly. My friend came over and in the bathroom bleached my hair and dyed it pink. And we went up into the sitting room, and Dad was sitting there watching the news, and I said, "Hey, Dad," and he just looked at me and smiled and went, "Hi, Carmel," and then continued watching his news. And then my friend Charlotte, who had dyed my hair, was like, "Well, Sean, what do you think of Carmel's hair?" And he's like, "Oh, it's lovely," and I went back to it. So he just, never made anything out of things, and just kind of accepted me for the person I was becoming.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's talk about a few reflection maybe type questions. What do you think you've learned by having to face grief as a young person?
Well, I've definitely learned compassion, empathy, resilience, independence. I've certainly had to become independent in many ways because of the loss of my mother. I've learned to advocate for myself a lot. And I've learned to not take anyone or anything for granted and to appreciate moments and I've learned that life isn't fair and that things can happen, and we need to be in the moment and appreciate those small and important things and important people in our lives. And
you mentioned learning to advocate for yourself. That's one I hadn't thought of. That's an interesting one. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of those. How about, what do you wish your mom knew about who you are today?
I'd love for her to have met my husband, because he's such a caring, loving, kind person, and I really do believe that she would love him. So that's something that makes me sad. I would love if she had that opportunity. My brother has twins, and my brother and his wife have twins, and I would love for her to have got to meet them because she loved children so much. But I feel like Mom's spirit is here and around me, so I do get the sense that she kind of knows what's going on.
You mentioned your husband, and I'm recalling a few minutes back you mentioned that there were some points over your life's journey so far at which you think losing your mom has been particularly hard. And so I guess I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what some of those have been, the things that pop up for you maybe as being the hardest over the years. I'm guessing perhaps your wedding and not having your mom there for that was one of them.
Yeah, that was challenging. I was very, very blessed and grateful to have had my dad there, and he was there for me. So that was very important to me. I think the lead up to the wedding, where I was looking for my wedding dress, and that in particular was, brought up feelings for me, because my mother was also a fashionista and she loved clothing and unique little boutiques and stuff. So she would have just loved that. And because I was going shopping and there were a lot of mother-daughter couples or mother-daughters in the dressing rooms around me, that was pretty tricky, because I would hear them talking to each other, and it was so sweet and lovely, and it was lovely to hear it, but it was also heartbreaking for me.
Yeah.
But the women in those boutiques were so sweet, and they were so pouring and showering love on me when I went in there, that in that way I felt, there's so much good in the world. They didn't know why I was in there by myself, but they were still just very kind. So yes, that, I think the lead up to the wedding was challenging in that way. The wedding itself was also challenging in the sense that I wanted Mom to be there, but it was still such a beautiful and wonderful day, and having the other people, my dad, my brother, my husband and his family, a lot of friends and relatives there, made it very special. So going through puberty was hard for me, because Mom died when I was 11. And so I was just hitting puberty around then. So that was tricky, going through all that. That was a challenging time. And then I think just worrying about my dad. And when I moved over to the US and knowing I was leaving him behind, and would he be okay? So there were different times like that, different phases in my life like that were tough.
What brought you over here?
Well, I came over to the US when I was in college, and worked for the summer in Wildwood, New Jersey on the roller coasters on Morey's Pier. And I loved it so much. It was so much fun. Everyone was wonderful and friendly. The sun was shining. The beach was beautiful. And so I started coming over for several summers after that and traveling around the U.S., Berkeley, and living in San Francisco and Berkeley and Portland. And I just knew very early on that I wanted to live here. And so I was training to be a teacher at home in Ireland, and I finished that. I actually won a green card in the green card lottery in Ireland, which is very rare, and that told me it was meant to be. And then I got a house sitting job over here in Portland and came over, and it kind of went from there. I moved back home again, and then I applied for a kindergarten job here in Portland and did an interview on the phone and got it, and just quit my job in Ireland and moved over.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you've been in Portland for 15 years, you said?
About 15, yeah. I kind of start to lose track, but it's been around.
Yeah.
15, yeah. We must have been living in Portland at the same time at one point then, because I was there from, well, when was I there? 2003 to 2008. Oh, yeah. We definitely did then, yeah. Because
Yeah.
I think I was here around 2005 or around 2005, 2006.
Yeah. Well, we might have bumped into each other on the street and never known it.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. Well, awesome. One topic we haven't touched on yet, which I am guessing that losing your mother would be particularly difficult, is Mother's Day.
Mm.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know you've written some about that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Mother's Day happened a few weeks or days after my mother died in Ireland, because Mother's Day is in March in Ireland, and my mother died on March 2nd. So that was tough. And in school, we were making cards for our mothers year in, year out. That was tricky because no one really said anything to me, like, you don't need to do this. They just gave me the paper like everybody else and said, let's just make our cards. And then I kind of drew a picture, and I may have drawn something for my dad, or I may have just drawn my mother and felt really sad. I can't exactly remember, but also Mother's Day was tough for me even before my mother died, because there were several Mother's Days when my mother was in hospital. So while my friends were talking about Mother's Day and how they might celebrate it or what they might do, Mom was in hospital. On the other hand, my mother and father never paid much attention to those holidays and called them Hallmark holidays. And so it was more really us kind of just wanting to give them a card and recognize them and tell them we love them in another piece of artwork. Mother's Day, after my mother died and when I grew older, I kind of ignored it. I tried to ignore it. I acted like it's just this date on the calendar and I'm just getting on with things. And so I would sometimes plan a trip and go away, and my focus then would be on the travel, where I'm going or what place I'm going to see. But in recent years, honestly, it's become harder because I'm married now. And so my husband celebrates Mother's Day with his mom and his family. And that has brought back to me what Mother's Day is and what it's about. And I'm kind of in it more than I was for several years, where I could just ignore it and close my eyes to it. Also, the fact that Mother's Day is celebrated in Ireland in March, and it's celebrated here in the US in May. And since there's a thing called the internet, I get bombarded with all these different reminders of that in March from Ireland, and then in May here. So,
oh boy! So you get twice the hits.
Yeah, so that's tricky, and I guess just being on the internet more and more in the last several years too, that has made it kind of, I've become more aware of it than I had been as well, in the sense that it's just unavoidable, all the advertisements and all the people talking about it, and you know. So yeah, Mother's Day was tough for me when I was younger, and then now in the last several years. Whereas there was a period in my life where I just kind of ignored it and was able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Gosh, we're approaching the end of our time here. I did want to ask you a couple more things. You've got a post, which I'll link, with quite a few books you mentioned and recommended on this topic of motherless daughters, I believe is the term that gets used in this genre. But are there one or two books you'd like to mention here that you think would be particularly good on this topic?
There's so many. So if I can only name one or two, let's see. Well, there's Hope Edelman's Motherless Daughters book. And she also has letters from motherless daughters. Those are really helpful. And when I first found Hope's book, Motherless Daughters, I was a grown-up, I was in my 20s, and I then realized that my feelings were valid and that I was not alone. So that book means a lot to me, because it wasn't until I found her book that I actually even thought this was something that should be talked about.
And her book is kind of like the classic book in this field, right?
It is, yeah, absolutely. And then Claire Bidwell Smith writes about grief and loss, and she has one called After This, and I find that very comforting and helpful. She goes into kind of what comes after death, and she goes around, talks to a lot of spiritual leaders, and goes to see psychics and goes to a shaman, and it's just, for me, it's very comforting and eye-opening, and just I was curious about what she would find out and discover and write about in that book. Mm-hmm. And actually, I went to a Motherless Daughters retreat with Hope Edelman and Claire Bidwell Smith and several other women who lost their mothers under the age of 21. I was at the first retreat they held in Ojai, and that was a wonderful experience, just to gather together with women who are experiencing the same things and the same feelings, and talk about it without any judgment or criticism, and lots of compassion there. Yeah, terrific. I think Alison Gilbert is involved with Hope Edelman in some of her retreats as well. That's right, yes, she is. I interviewed Alison a couple months back, I guess, on her book Past and Present, about keeping the memories of our loved ones alive. Yes, that's a wonderful book. Yeah, oh yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned Claire Bidwell Smith. I've actually got this book right here, Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief, which I'm interviewing her in a couple of weeks maybe. Wonderful. So that I'm really anxious to talk to her about that. Yes. There's several books out there that are very helpful, and actually that blog post that I wrote, 10 books I recommend from Motherless Daughters, it is my most visited blog. It's been visited by over 100,000 people every day. Wow. The stats on my page. So obviously there's a lot of people out there wanting to read other people's stories and know that they're not alone, and they're seeking out books. And I feel like I could write another one of those blogs, because I've read 10 more books since then. Well, if you do, let me know, and we'll be sure to post that one too. But I think that's terrific that people want to try to better understand what this experience is like. And I suppose everybody has their own reasons for wanting to understand. And I recall that several of the books on the list were memoirs, which brings me to the fact that I believe you are working on a memoir as well, right? Yes, I am. It's titled briefly, I Knew My Mother. The previous title was A Lovely Woman, and that's the name of my blog. But I've come to realize that I need to let readers know what the topic is about, what the book is about. And so I changed it to Briefly, I Knew My Mother, and that that title came to me one day, just like a whisper in the breeze, and I felt, yes, that is exactly what the book needs to be called. I had called it A Lovely Woman because people used to refer to my mother, and still do, as a lovely woman, or a lovely lady all the time. And so that was kind of my working title, but then it just became the title of the blog post, and people shared my blog a lot. And so that title was out there, but I recently just changed it to Briefly, I Knew My Mother.
I love that. That's, yeah, very powerful.
Thank you.
I can't wait to read it. So you'll have to keep us all posted so that we can we can be on the lookout for that.
I will. Thanks.
So let me just ask one more question here to wrap things up then. If you could say one thing to adults who may have a grieving child in their life, what would you say to them?
I would say that one caring, consistent, loving presence is enough to make a difference in a child's life. And that child will love you so much for the care that you give them. And just be present for them, hear them, see them, and also take care of your own health. That's very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Carmel Breathnach, who lost her mom when she was just 11 years old. And so, Carmel, where can listeners find you if they would like to learn more about you and your work?
Well, I have a blog called alovelywoman.wordpress.com. I'm also on Facebook. My public page is Carmel Breathnach Author. I guess that's how you put it in there, Carmel Breathnach Author.
Can you spell your last name for us?
Yes. Breathnach is BREATHNACH.
Okay.
I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. So.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes too, so people can be sure to find you. Carmel, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and thank you for the work that you do.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Carmel Breathnach as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 48. And I hope you caught last week's show on grief in the holidays with the folks at Cara. I'm hearing from listeners that they're finding that really timely and useful, and answering some of their questions that they're not sure maybe what to expect if it's the first holiday after their spouse has died, or maybe if it's not the first, but it's been a tough holiday season in the past. So please do check that out last week. Again, the episode with the folks at Cara. Also, be on the lookout for next week's show. It's great. Had a great discussion with Claire Bidwell-Smith, and the topic is grief and anxiety. And she is the author of the book, Anxiety, The Missing Stage of Grief. Fascinating book. I'd encourage you to check that out, and be sure and catch next week's discussion. Also, over on the website, I've been doing some more writing lately. So if you have missed some of those, I think I've posted some of them on social media. But if you go to my website, jennylisk.com/articles, I've posted them there. So there's one, it's called What I've Learned About Widowed Parenting, that I wrote for Parent Map. And it's some of the key points of things that I've learned from my guests over the past year. So kind of a summary type, drawing out some of the themes. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't seen it yet. Also, some articles that are more for allies of widowed parents, but maybe you have some people in your life that would like to know how to help you, or even help others. If they're experiencing a death or a life-threatening illness. One of them is called How to Bring Food to a Widowed Parent, No Casserole Required. So some creative ideas for bringing food. And supporting friends that way. Another one is called The Best Text That I Got as a Caregiver for My 43-year-old Husband. So really practical about ways to support friends, and how text messaging can help out with that. And then another really practical one is called 25 Practical Ways to Help a Friend Through the Illness or Death of a Spouse. And that one's for Parent Map as well. So just, a whole bunch of ideas. Some will work for some people, some won't, but that's why there's 25 of them, because hopefully some of them will work or will be helpful. And then most recently, and this is not exactly on the topic of widowed parenting, but I did talk about starting the podcast. It's called How a Tweet from Adam Grant Helped Me Beat Procrastination. So if procrastination is something that you struggle with, as I do, check that out. You might find that interesting. I've heard from people that they thought it was useful. So anyway, at jennylisk.com/articles, and those are all there. And I think that's all for this week. So until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.